Chapter 3. The next night also, nothing happened. Hans, with his first-hand knowledge of the thing, suggested that it had fed elsewhere, and that there would be a quiescent period. And, feeling that I was neglecting my practice, I stayed away from the farm for a few days. But late Saturday afternoon, I found a note from Hans. "It has come back," he had written. After supper, I took my car and drove out to Brubaker Farm. There had been a heavy thaw, which had held on for several days. The roads were mere ribbons of mud and dirty ice. Both husband and wife looked inhumanly tired. I noticed that Hans had not shaved for at least 2 or 3 days. "We didn't want to trouble you," he told me. "We've slept a little in the daytime, taking turns, but even in the day we can feel the thing near the house, and we're deathly tired." "Sit quietly and don't speak," Hilda said softly, "and you will feel it." I sat as she had asked, and, striking inward at me, I could sense the same crawling horror that I had known before. I looked at the others. "Yes, I can feel it. But Hans, Hilda, you are utterly exhausted. Lie down now and rest. I'll watch." Hans nodded eagerly toward Hilda. "Lie down and try to sleep, darling. Dr. Kurt will sit up with me. It will be safe." Hilda stood up uncertainly and went into the bedroom. I poured out half a tumbler full of brandy, diluted it with water, and made Hans drain the glass. The liquor seemed to strengthen him, and I talked. "We can beat this thing in 2 ways, Hans. We know that it is a mass of dead alive cells controlled by a deathless, malign entity. The Slavic peoples had the right idea when they, as they thought, trapped vampires in their coffins, drove stakes through their hearts, and sealed the coffins. What they did not truly realize was the nature of the being they combated. Because the thing is half physical, it has, to an extent, physical limitations. It must sleep, and what, in effect, those old-timers did was to catch their vampire asleep and seal it in a box, which, fortunately, happened to be strong enough to resist its physical strength. The stake through the heart meant nothing. It was the airtight, solid coffin that did the business, restrained the tiling until, as its physical substance slowly died, so was its spirit rendered homeless. Now we know that this entity is strongly attracted to this particular vicinity. In the course of time, it will find a permanent place where it can sleep, inside a barrel, perhaps, or in a cistern, or in an old trunk, or even a casket, if there's such a thing available. And if we can find that hiding place, and, while the thing is still within, seal its receptacle hermetically tight, we will most likely have beaten it. There is yet another way to beat the thing, Hans. That way is for someone to invite it to absorb him, if it can. The entity will try, Hans, for it knows nothing of fear. Then, if the man's will is greater, the man will win. Otherwise, the thing will absorb him, continue to grow, and he will cease to exist. Hans's eyes were closed now, but when I stopped speaking, he roused himself enough to mutter, "I'm fallen asleep." Then his head drooped forward heavily. Leisurely, I opened a book and began to read. A night of wakefulness lay ahead. The hours slipped slowly by. I could hear Hilda, through the half-opened bedroom door, breathing slowly and deeply. Hans, beside me, snored irregularly. It was close to 3 when I heard footsteps sloshing up the driveway, passing around behind the house, hesitating, slowly ascending the steps. Then a knock. Looking back now, I think that, at that moment, I was horribly afraid, even though a revolver lay on the table, and I certainly had no lurking fear that the thing would walk up to the house like that. My body chilled with fear. I opened the door. And then I exclaimed with relief, for outside on the porch, bedraggled with mud and slush, stood 18-year-old Bertha Brandt. She wore a shapeless, dirty, impressed coat. When she saw me, she shrank back away from the door. "Bertha, you poor kid, Come in here and dry out those wringing wet clothes you're wearing and tell me what's wrong. I noticed that she looked curiously at Hans. There's been sickness, I explained hurriedly. Nothing serious. Hans has been up 2 or 3 nights. I looked at her squarely. So you're back. She glanced at me timidly. You know, then, that I ran away. Yes, I knew. But here, sit down by the fire. There, take off your coat. Suddenly, for some unaccountable reason, I remembered why I was at Brubaker's at 3 o'clock in the morning. I remembered all that Hans had told me about the strange white cat, about the dog that looked like Nan, about the boy who had wandered down the road. I laughed then at the silliness of it. This is Bertha, all right, I told myself. She's the same girl she always was, right as rain, except that she's a little tired. And, almost aping my thought, Bertha said, Can I lie down beside Hilda? I daren't go home tonight. I daren't. I was pottering around the stove with my back turned toward the girl, trying to warm over some coffee. Lie down beside Hilda, I said absently. In a minute. I went to the corner cupboard and found a cup and saucer. Then I poured out the coffee, doctored it plentifully with milk and sugar, and turned back to Bertha. She was not in the room. Bertha, I called softly. The crawling, cold sensation had begun again at the base of my spine. To my inexpressible relief, her voice answered from the bedroom. Here, Dr. Kurt, I'm so tired. Come and get your coffee, then you can lie down and rest. What you need now is food. I know, she answered slowly, but I'm so tired. And you said that in a minute I could lie down with Hilda. It's been a minute. Just like a child. But I was impatient. You mustn't lie on Hilda's bed while you're all dirty. You'll have to wash first. There was a little pause. Then the voice answered, still softly. Hilda won't mind. Hilda's asleep. Hilda's sound asleep. I went to the doorway and stood there uncertainly, half in gloom, half in brightness. I could see the figures of the 2 women lying on the bed, close against each other, almost, my imagination told me, melting together. Come, Bertha, I said mildly, you're dirtying Hilda's bed. There was no answer. As my eyes became more accustomed to the dimness, I could see there on the bed there were no longer 2 women. The 2 bodies were pressing together like ghastly Siamese twins, dissolving together into one. My heart, in that instant, froze like a lump of ice. Somehow, my whole body trembling horribly, I leaped across the half-darkened room, knelt on the bed, and dug frenzied fingers into the thing that had looked like Bertha, and that was now eating the sleeping woman, dissolving her as might a powerful acid. My fingers, beneath the muddy, tattered garments, sank deep, not into the firm flesh of a living girl, but into a yielding mass of protoplasmic slime. Then I screamed, and as I fought and tore at the flaccid, jelly-like mass, I screamed again and again without pause, like a madman, without hearing my own voice, knowing only, from the tautness of my throat and the beating of my breath, that I shrieked. It was like trying to grasp something that would not be grasped. The stuff beneath the garments ran like water in a bag, and I saw that the thing was slowly giving up pretense of human shape. The face was changing, the hands and arms and the contours of the body were dissolving, and in the last second before it melted into shapeless slime, from the vanishing mouth came Bertha Brandt's voice, crying, I didn't do it, Dr. Kurt. I didn't. Then the thing was only a mass of jelly, still clinging like some loathsome, colorless leech to Hilda's back and shoulders. My body shrinking, I crawled over it and through it, seized Hilda's arms, and pulled her off the bed onto the floor. And then I screamed again, for of Hilda there was left only half a body. Her spine lay bare, her ribs curved nakedly, her skull gaped, her entrails drooped across the dingy carpet. It was like a slaughterhouse in hell. Suddenly, the light streaming through the doorway dimmed, and I saw Hans standing there, the gun in his hand. I saw the spurting red flames and heard the crash of firing. I saw the pulpy mass on the bed jerk and shiver as each slug tore through it. Then there was silence. Yet through the haze of smoke, I saw the mess of protoplasmic slime drip slowly off the bed and slide across the floor toward the horrible ruin that had once been a woman. And on my hands and knees, I tried to push it back, scooping at it as, unconcernedly, the thing flowed across the floor between my fingers and again fastened upon Hilda. Hans was kneeling beside me, but we couldn't keep the thing away from the dead woman. It wasn't possible. Then, abruptly, Hans stood up. His face was ghastly white, like the face of a dead man. Without a backward glance, he left the corpse, with that awful thing still crawling over it, and went out of the room into the kitchen. And there I saw him take a pad of wax from the wood box, heat it over the stove, and methodically seal the crevices in the kitchen door leading out onto the porch. When he had finished, he nodded at me, a grim look on his face, and made a wide gesture that included kitchen and bedroom. "A coffin, Dr. Kurt," he said slowly. "I have made a coffin of these rooms and sealed the thing in it. When it is slime, it cannot escape, and when it is in the shape of a human being, we can fight it so that it cannot unlock the door." Then he went back into the bedroom, and slowly I followed. We had been in the kitchen only a few minutes, but in those minutes the horror had finished its ghastly work. Nothing remained of Hilda, only a bag of clothes lay there limply, and nestling in them glistened a great mound of watery, jelly-like stuff, faintly quivering, alertly alive. Then I saw that Hans had brought matches and strips of newspaper. As I watched, he twisted the paper into spills, lit one, and plunged the flaming mass against the globule of colorless life on the floor. The mound of stuff quivered and writhed and slid swiftly across the floor. As it sought to escape, Hans, his eyes intent, his doubled jaws grim, followed it about the room, always keeping the blazing paper torches pressed against the shrinking, unholy thing. The air was quickly becoming thick with rancid smoke, and the odor of burning flesh wafted throughout the room. Stumbling, sobbing, together we attacked the horror. Here and there on the floor and carpet showed brown, charred smears. The thing's silent, sliding attempts to escape were, somehow, more terrible than if it had cried out in agony. The smoke in the room had become a thick haze. And then the thing seemed to gather purpose. It rolled swiftly across the bedroom floor, stopped upon the disheveled pile of clothes that Hilda had worn, and, as we paused to light fresh spills, it changed. It reared erect as a fountain might gush up. It put forth arms, developed breasts, overspread itself with color. In the time that it might take to draw a long breath, the thing had vanished, and as something that we knew to be the same ghastly entity, but that looked as Hilda had looked in life, stood naked there amid the jumbled clothes. Swiftly the entity, for I cannot call it by Hilda's name, stooped and drew about itself the skirt and blouse. Then, barefooted and stockingless, it walked into the kitchen. Like a man awaking from a drugged slumber, Hans leaped before the door, held up a blazing spill. The thing spoke, and the voice was the voice of Hilda. "I want to go out, Hans." It moved forward slightly. Hans, his features racked, almost unrecognizable, thrust the blazing paper before him menacingly. "You'll never leave this house! We're going to burn you!" The thing that looked and spoke like Hilda shook its head, and I gasped to see the wavy, fine blonde tresses undulate and shimmer with the gesture, and it smiled. "You'll never burn me, Hans. I'm a prisoner, Hans. You want to destroy the thing that holds me, but you don't want to burn me to death, Hans. For as yet I haven't suffered, except from your fire. I'm Hilda, Hans." Then Hans asked hoarsely, and I saw that the fire was burning his fingers, "How can I know?" The thing smiled. "You can't know, Hans, but if you destroy me, Hilda suffers. Let me go." Then Hans shook his head. "No, we will stay here until you starve, until you rot into nothingness." Came the inexorable reply, "As I suffer, Hilda suffers. As I starve, she starves." Hans looked at me, and I could see that he was nerving himself toward an incredibility. "Then, by heaven, Dr. Kurt, I will try the other way." He looked at the entity, at the thing that looked like Hilda. "Come, Hilda," he said simply. "If you are a prisoner in that thing before me, hear me. I want to join you. I want to join you, and Bertha, and Nan, and God only knows what other unfortunate creatures with souls who have been overcome. But I do not surrender, and I cannot be beaten by guile. Let the thing come and attempt to subdue me, and help me, Hilda and Bertha, and all the rest, help me." He stood there before the door, his arms extended, his body rigid. And then the horror that looked like Hilda slowly moved forward, a smile on its lips, came closer and closer to him, touched him, was enfolded in his arms, lips touching lips. And Hans's strong arms flexed, and in turn it embraced him, a smile on its sweetly beautiful face. And as they stood there, the man and the being whose very nature remains an unanswerable question, I prayed as I have never prayed before, prayed that the good overcome the evil. For minutes that seemed hours, they stood there, motionless. Treading softly, I moved a step forward, and I caught a glimpse of the thing's eyes, and I was comforted, for I seemed to read in them something of humanity that could not have come to them through guile. I sensed that, in truth, those others who had been engulfed were fighting on the side of the man. And as I watched, the horror seemed to become frailer and weaker, slowly at first, and then faster and faster, as before my eyes the semblance of Hilda faded into nothingness, and only Hans remained, holding tightly clasped in his arms a crumpled skirt and blouse. And even yet for long minutes Hans did not move, and I sensed that still some metamorphosis went on, some change invisible to human eyes. But at last Hans moved, and, looking at the bundle of clothes in his arms, as might an awakened sleeper, he stroked them tenderly and put them gently down on the table. At last he spoke to me, and his voice was the voice of the man I had known, but immeasurably more beautiful, immeasurably more strong. "We worked together, we fought together, Hilda and Bertha and those unfortunate boys and Nan, and you, Dr. Kurt, too, and we have won." He walked across the floor to the center of the room, and I watched the stout boards give beneath his weight. And yet I can feel the thing inside me, like a devilish flame that would eat me if it could. It is in me, and I think that it cannot escape. I pray that it never overcome me and escape. Then he looked at me thoughtfully. "In the eyes of the town, Dr. Kurt, there is a bit of a mystery here. Hilda is gone, and Bertha Brandt, and even the Peterson boy. So you must go to your home, and you must say that you have been visiting me, and that I am insane. As for me, I will leave a note and go away, and the people will believe that I am a murderer, and that I have run away." I bowed my head silently. He spoke the truth. He must go away, and the world would believe him a butchering maniac. For a long time he did not speak, but stood there silently, his head sunk upon his breast as he thought. Then, "I will walk to your car with you. I thank you, we all thank you, for what you have done. Probably I shall never see you again." He led me from the house. Then I was sitting in the car, the motor running softly, while Hans stood there before me in the damp snow. He extended his hand. "Goodbye." "Goodbye," I said inanely. And while yet he stood there in the snow beside the house, I drove away. Thus it is that our village believes that Hans murdered with bloodthirsty abandon, and then, fearing detection, mysteriously escaped. I alone know the truth, and the truth weighs heavily upon me, and probably always will. And so I have begun to prepare a record of the true happenings in the Brubaker case, and presently I shall see that this record is brought before the proper authorities. Meanwhile, I wonder, where and what is Hans?